It's Draft Lottery Day. Will the Blue Jackets end up with their best case scenario, worst case scenario, or just their most likely case scenario? We talk about all three of those on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to know this episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis to taunt your friends with. So download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So yeah, Draft Lottery is tonight, is in, as of the time of recording this, about 14 hours. Could go in some fun ways, could go in some not fun ways. And so I ran a bunch of lottery sims this morning while I was doing some prep for the show. And I decided that actually some the more fun way to kind of talk about this is probably to look at what's the best case scenario for the Blue Jackets tonight? What's the worst case scenario for the Blue Jackets tonight? And what's the most likely case scenario? And so we'll talk about all three of those. We'll talk about the players that could be available for the Blue Jackets at each of these scenarios. And who knows? Maybe the Blue Jackets will get lucky. It seems unlikely because the Blue Jackets don't ever get lucky, but they could. And frankly, that's what we're going to start with. Is we're going to start with the best case scenario here, which is obviously the Blue Jackets win the draft lottery. They get the first overall pick. They end up getting Macklin Celebrini, who is not Connor Bedard, but is still a very, very, very solid first overall player. Just very exciting. He's kind of on a level, I think, with an Adam Fantilli, which seems, I feel okay about that. You know, if the Blue Jackets get a second Adam Fantilli to play with, then everybody's winning. You know, well, not everybody. We're winning. In terms of his scouting profile, he is a college player. He just played with BU for his freshman season. He's got size. He's got a 200-foot game. He's a really good all-round player. 6 foot tall, 190 pounds. He's not huge, but he's a really, really fun player. He's got a little bit of speed. He's not not the most elite skater, but his straight line speed is pretty great. He's pretty good in his own zone. That feels to me like that's what is the most important thing about his game, is that he's that 200-foot player. You know, Adam Fantilli is a power forward. He is an elite player. The Blue Jackets getting a 1-2 punch down the middle of Fantilli and Celebrini, that sets a team up. You know, it's not quite Crosby and Malkin, but it's that 1-2 punch. You know, it's that you get your Kane and your Taves, you get your Crosby and your Malkin, you get your Fantilli and your Celebrini. You know, and I'm not comparing any of these players to Crosby, Malkin, Kane, Taves specifically, but in back-to-back drafts, those teams got, their two franchise pieces at first and second overall for Crosby and Malkin. And then it was, I believe, Kane went first overall and Taves, I think, went third overall in back-to-back drafts. And getting Celebrini and Fantilli third and then first in back-to-back drafts, that's how you build a team. You know, that's how you move on from the rebuild. Because the Blue Jackets, they need that impact. They need one more impact piece, I think. Obviously, there's some growing to do. There's some stuff to figure out in terms of the coach, the GM. But the Blue Jackets can't keep drafting top 5 in the draft and then not getting anywhere with it. Like this should be the last year where you are in the top 5. This is their 3rd year straight that they will be, or 4th year straight that they'll be drafting in the top 6. You picked up Ken Johnson, you picked up David Jiricek, you picked up Adam Fantilli, you pick up whoever you're going to pick up this time. Like, you have to start climbing now. Otherwise, what happens is you end up perennially in that top 5 conversation, like a team like Arizona, who I believe has drafted top 10 in the last 6 or 7 years or something stupid like that, and if they manage to get Fantilli as this last piece, that's awesome. Like that's great. He's not a Connor Bedard level game changer. He is not immediately gonna be the best player on the team in the way that Connor Bedard was for the Blackhawks last year, but it's really, really exciting to think about. And the Blue Jackets, this is so unlikely to happen. Just because, well, for a bunch of reasons. Mostly because the Blue Jackets don't get to have nice things. They currently have the 4th best odds. They have a 9.5% chance of drafting 1st overall or 2nd overall. They have a 0.3% chance of drafting 3rd overall, which I believe is only... So that would only happen if... whoever's drafting 12th. So if the Flyers win the lottery, they can get bumped up to 2nd. If the Flyers win the lottery, they can't win 1st overall. They can only go to 2nd. So in that case, San Jose would keep their 1st overall pick. Philadelphia would go to 2nd. And then the Blue Jackets, if they won 2nd overall, would go 3rd, I believe is how that would work. So it would be a case of Philadelphia winning 1st overall. They get bumped. And then Blue Jackets winning 2nd overall, they would get bumped to 3rd. So it's so hugely unlikely that would happen. That's why 0.3%. They have a 15% chance of staying where they are. They have a 45% chance of getting bumped down to 5th, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the odds are not necessarily in the Blue Jackets' favor here. But if there is some karma in the universe out there for the Blue Jackets getting bumped down from last draft, maybe it happens. Maybe they get bumped up to 2nd overall. I still don't think that they get Celebrini in that case. I think Celebrini's going 1st overall, regardless of who. Like, there's a lot of talk about Anton Salayev or Artem Levshinov kind of being in the conversation for 1st overall, depending on who wins. But I still think it's Bedard. Not Bedard, excuse me, Celebrini. The odds are not in the Blue Jackets' favor, is the point where I'm going with this. They've got just under a 10% chance. They don't get to have nice things. This is the absolute best case scenario, but it's also so far from the most likely scenario that it feels like a pipe dream, Like, we've been talking all year about it, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up. I'm trying to temper my expectations in the way that, last year I tempered my expectations. And then ended up getting really annoyed anyway. So, we'll see what comes with the draft lottery tonight. But I'm not holding out hope. My assumption is that the Blue Jackets probably will stay where they are. They will probably draft 4th overall. We'll take a quick break. Then when we get back, we'll talk about that scenario, which is not statistically the most likely scenario if you look at the actual numbers, but is the most likely scenario based on just kind of how things usually go. So we'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you about Monopoly Go, because I love this game. I know I talk about it all of the time, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. I've been playing it for months. I was really excited when I heard that they were going to sponsor the Locked On NHL channel, because it's my go-to, stupid phone game that I play whenever I have a free minute. There's timed tournaments. You can team up with your friends. You can work against your friends. You win prizes either way. The more you win together, the more prizes you unlock. You can trade things that you collect. They've got stickers. They've got playing pieces that you can travel the board with. My playing piece is actually a little hockey skate at the minute, which I enjoy very much. You can taunt your friends with emojis when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults, and it feels new and exciting every day. They've got constantly changing tournaments and challenges. They've got unique mini games like digging for treasure. That's what's happening at the minute. I need like 3 more treasure shovels to win that one, so I'm very excited about that. They've got a robot pachinko machine, which I enjoy, even if it feels a little bit like it's rigged against me. There's always new timed events that help me win big. Massive multipliers for things that you win. They've got rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Moppy Go, so get off the bench and go download it for free now on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely case scenario for the Blue Jackets in tonight's draft lottery. We've talked about the best case scenario, which is obviously them winning the draft lottery. But that to me feels like the most unlikely case scenario. We're going to talk about what happens if they stand pat, if they don't move. This is not necessarily the most likely scenario. If you look at the numbers, so I talked about it a little bit there, the Blue Jackets actually have a 45% chance of drafting 5th overall, and only a 15% chance of staying where they are at 4th overall. This is due to a handful of factors. Mostly it's the fact that if you add up the numbers of how likely it is that one of Montreal, Arizona, Ottawa, Seattle, Calgary, New Jersey, or Buffalo wins the draft lottery, that all adds up to 45%, give or take. So like that's kind of where it's at. It's incredibly unlikely because all of those individual things only one of those individual things needs to hit, but the most likely of those things to hit is 8.5%, which is Montreal at number 5. So like I'm not worried about that necessarily, although I wasn't worried about them moving back last year and look what happened. So the worst case scenario is, the most likely scenario is that the Blue Jackets draft 4th overall. And honestly, I'm fine with this. In terms of who's going to be available, 4th overall, this draft is really weird. It's not like last draft, I think, where there was kind of there was the number 1, and then there was 2 and 3, and then from 4 onward, there was kind of again, another tier there. After Celebrini, between like 2 and 6, I think there is kind of anyone could go, and so at 4th overall, that means that I've kind of looked at 3 players that will be available. So at least one of these players will be available. Multiple of them could be available depending on what happens, So like I think there's some talk about do the Ducks draft a defenseman? Do they take one of Silayev or Levshinov? Do the Blackhawks take a defenseman? Because obviously they have they have their forward franchise piece. Do they draft their quote unquote Duncan Keith? And neither of those players are really like a Duncan Keith type player, but do they draft their franchise defenseman at 2nd overall or 3rd overall, wherever they sit right now? I think they're a 2nd overall. Blue Jackets sitting at 4th overall. At least one of Ivan Demidov, Caden Lindstrom, and Berkeley Cannon is going to be available. I'm happy with any of those guys. I think Berkeley Cannon is the most Blue Jackets-like pick. I think I would be the happiest with Caden Lindstrom. But I think Ivan Demidov is also a real option for the Blue Jackets. They have that franchise center in Adam Fantilli. Do they go with another center? Do they go with Caden Lindstrom, a guy who could play at the center, who could play in center or could play at wing, and, add him to the mix of, that young center pool that they're starting to develop with Sillinger, Kent Johnson, Dmitry Voronkov. They have a lot of young centers that, I think Johnson is probably a permanent winger in the NHL right now. But what is the most enticing option for the Blue Jackets? Is it that impact center? Is it that elite winger? Is it that guy that, Berkeley Cannon is like the Kent Johnson pick of this draft, I think, he's got just so much skill and flash and excitement. The Blue Jackets might just take him and work everything else out. It's you draft the skill and then everything else will happen, and that's kind of the Berkeley Cannon effect, I think, is he's got skill out the butt. There's some holes in his game, but I could see the Blue Jackets deciding, okay, the ceiling is sky high. let's take him. Let's figure something else out. Let's figure the rest out further down the road. Lindstrom has size. He's got a little bit of skill. He's got that 200-foot game. He's my favorite of the three players. I think he's a guy that could play on the wing if they need him to, but having a 1-2 down the middle of Fantilli and Lindstrom is just real exciting, if you ask me. Demidov, I go back and forth on him. He's a guy that's probably going to be a little bit more of not necessarily a project, but I don't know off the top of my head what his contract looks like for the KHL right now, but I imagine he probably will stay in Russia for a couple of years. So that's kind of a case of, okay, do the Blue Jackets want someone that they can bring in immediately, like Lindstrom? Do they want someone that they can maybe send back to juniors if they need to, like Catton? Or do they draft someone like Demidov, who probably is a couple of years away from coming over? And then, they get a fully formed 21-year-old Ivan Demidov, staple him to Fantilli's wing, and just watch them torch the league. I think Lindstrom is the most enticing of those three prospects, but I could see all three guys. One of them is going to be available, and it might be a case of, well, Lindstrom goes 3rd overall, or Demidov goes 2nd overall. Looking at the mock draft on Tankathon, they have Celebrini going 1st overall. They have Demidov 2nd, Levshinov 3rd overall, and then Lindstrom 4th overall. They have Berkeley Catton going at 10th overall. So, if that holds and the Blue Jackets have Caden Lindstrom available to them at 4th overall, you do that. You take him immediately. That to me, anyway. There's a lot of conversation of oh, what about Cole Eiserman? He had a really great under 18s. There's some red flags there in his game that I am not super, and we'll talk about him in a minute because he's going to come up when we talk about the worst case scenario. Not that he is the worst case scenario necessarily, but we'll talk about that in a minute here. But if Caden Lindstrom is available at 4th overall, you draft him, and you consider that a win. In my book, if he goes and Demidov is available, go for it. Catton, I think, is probably, I could see them drafting him, but he's a guy that is, I think, likely to fall, especially if you look at where he is on this mock draft. I don't know off the top of my head what the argument is here for them, for the order that it's in, excuse me, but I don't know why I don't know why he's fallen, but I think he is going to fall. So we'll see. He's a guy that maybe the Blue Jackets try and get a 10 to 15 range pick, and he's maybe a guy that you target there, but who knows? Caden Lindstrom is my pick at 4th overall. Is the official Locked On Blue Jackets pick at 4th overall is Caden Lindstrom. So that's kind of all I've got to say about that. We'll take another quick break, and then when we get back, we'll talk about what the worst case scenario is going to be, which is the Blue Jackets end up moving down in the draft order. It's coming up in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel, which is heating up at the minute. It's winner-take-all time in the NBA and the NHL. They're giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. New customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just pick any heavy favorite that you can find on FanDuel. And if it comes out, then you're going to get $150 that you can spend on spreads, moneyline, player props, and even more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and also the official partner of us, the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely case scenario for tonight's draft lottery for the Blue Jackets. We've talked about the best case scenario where they win the draft lottery. We've talked about the most likely scenario where they stay where they are at 4th. And now we're going to talk about the worst case scenario, which is the Blue Jackets get bumped down in the draft. And again, this is mathematically the most likely is them picking 5th overall because of math that I'm not going to get into again. The Blue Jackets could also get bumped down to 6th overall. So that would mean that 2 teams jump them. So that's Montreal, Arizona, Ottawa, Seattle, Calgary, New Jersey, Buffalo, or Philadelphia could all jump them. Or technically Minnesota, I think, as well. Two of those teams could jump the Blue Jackets. They would end up drafting 5th or 6th. Obviously, that's what happened last year. They got jumped by Chicago, ended up drafting 3rd overall when they finished 2nd in the standings. And this is not like the end of the world. Everything is terrible, but it is disappointing to have to suffer through such a miserable season. And then, a team like, for example, New Jersey that was in the playoff tour, was in playoff conversation for, large parts of the season. If they jump in, Blue Jackets get pushed down, New Jersey gets another franchise piece. It would be frustrating. I feel a little bit like, we've done our suffering. We deserve to have this top 5 pick or this top 4 pick or even this top 1 pick, but in terms of the mock draft, it starts getting into conversations of like, okay, who's available now? And it gets a little bit more kind of squirrely after about 3. It gets a little bit kind of, 10 guys could be available and anyone could draft. The Tankathon mock draft has Cole Eiserman available at 5th overall and then Sam Dickinson available at 6th overall. I don't think I take either of those guys. I could be convinced with Sam Dickinson. 70 points in 68 games in the OHL. Cole Eiserman, I think there's too many red flags in his game. I think he's got an incredible shot, 58 goals in 57 games for the USNTP. But there's something about him that I can't fully get on board with. You've got guys like Zeev Buim, who is maybe my pick for the best defenseman in the draft. He had 50 points in 42 games at Denver University. This has Berkeley Catton, obviously, still available at 6th overall. Zane Perek, who had 96 points in 66 games in the OHL. He's a really polarizing defenseman. I think it probably comes down to, do the Blue Jackets want a left defenseman or a right defenseman? The other option, of course, also is if you fall in the draft lottery, if you hit 6, do you trade it? I don't know what that package would look like, but do you trade that 1st overall pick and like maybe, you get, this is okay. I'm just going to throw this out there. Maybe this is insane. I'm literally just kind of spitballing here. Do you package Elvis in the 1st overall pick to get an impact player back and also maybe avoid having to take a big useless contract back? That seems super unlikely. And I think you'd probably, I don't think that's necessarily the move here, but if you can get rid of Elvis' contract and get like a young impact forward back in return, maybe you do that. If you're picking 6th overall, I guess it depends on if the guy that they want is still available at 6th, like if they're really high on Berkeley Catton, for example, maybe they do that. Maybe they trade it for, they trade it to move back to, 9th or 10th overall and take that guy like that Berkeley Catton or that Zeev Buim, and also get, again, another young impact forward from a Seattle or a Calgary or a New Jersey or a Buffalo. There's options here is what I'm saying. It's not what anyone wants. I'm sure everyone's prepared for the Blue Jackets to end up drafting 6th overall just because of how the luck has gone in this season. Of everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong in terms of bad luck, in terms of bad bounces, in terms of bad timing. This feels very much like this might as well happen, but if they drop in the draft, I wouldn't be surprised to see them maybe have that in the conversation. The Montreal Canadiens were in the conversation to trade 5th overall last year, I believe, and they were like, no, we're taking David Reinbacher with it. So, okay, fine. It's not likely. It's probably not going to happen. But if it does, frustrating, not the end of the world. In terms of, and especially, and this is the other thing, is this is Blue Jackets' only top 30 pick. They currently have they traded their 2nd round pick to Philadelphia, but they can decide whether or not they want to keep that based on what happens in the 1st round, what happens with the new GM, what happens if they manage to trade up into the 1st round again. I don't know. There's a lot, again, lots of moving pieces, lots of things happening, etc., etc. It's going to be interesting. How do you feel the draft lottery is going to go tonight? Let me know in the comments. I'm pretty set on the 4th overall pick. Obviously, we're all rooting for that draft lottery win because I feel like the Blue Jackets deserve it. They've never won the draft lottery before. I think everyone is mostly rooting for it to be not Chicago, quite honestly. But we'll see. Let's wrap it up here. Let me know how you feel about the draft lottery. Are you optimistic? Are you excited? Who would you take if the Blue Jackets end up first, fourth, or sixth? Those are kind of the three options that I looked at here. And tomorrow we'll talk about the draft lottery. We'll either be excited, we'll be annoyed, we'll probably look in a little bit more detail at what that fourth or first or sixth or whatever position is likely to bring the Blue Jackets. And we'll hopefully have some fun with it. But who knows? I'm both tempering expectations and also expecting the worst, which is not a great combination, but we're going to try to stay optimistic, but not too optimistic, Thank you for listening, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on both Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to email me, if you have comments, concerns, criticisms, questions, you can do that at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for making us your first listen of the day and making us your first listen every single day. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.